You're watching This Week in Louisiana Politics with Fred Childers.
Well, I'm joined here on set by Senator Sharon Hewitt. She's a Republican from Slidell. Thanks for coming on the show, Senator.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Well, as we were talking before, I've watched you pass a lot of legislation. I was down at the Capitol with you during the 2018 sessions. I think there were like 4 of them. There was a lot passed then, but this last session, I think you got like a dozen bills passed through the legislature. So I want to talk about some of them. The first one I want to talk about with you is a bill that actually became newsworthy to us when the Secretary of State, Tom Shedler, went through his sexual harassment suit. Your bill, I believe it was 182. What did that bill do in that situation?
Well, you know, last year I worked to pass sexual harassment legislation that established better policies within the state. We knew that we did not have good policies in place. And then I had the legislative auditor actually help us scope out how big is this sexual harassment problem in the state of Louisiana. And he came back and he said that we had spent $10.4 million over the last 10 years of taxpayer dollars on sexual harassment settlements and judgments. And so this year my focus was on protecting taxpayer dollars so that we weren't spending that money on the indiscretions of bad actors within state government, both elected officials and state workers. So the bill was focused on not using taxpayer dollars for those indiscretions. And of course it was very well received by my constituents. They're outraged that we're spending their money on those things when the needs of our state are so great.
Well, not only your constituents, you got some bipartisan support on this too, right?
Oh, I think it passed with flying colors on both sides, so it was definitely not a partisan issue. You know, we want to have a safe workplace for all people, and we want to make sure that those that are guilty of sexual harassment are accountable for their own actions and hold elected officials in particular to a higher standard. Did
it apply to the Tom Shedler situation?
Had this legislation been in place previously, it would have. And so, you know, now we're in a little bit of a transition period. But clearly, the intent of the state of Louisiana is that, you know, that the money for those settlements and judgments should be borne by the guilty parties.
Are we seeing, just switching gears a little bit here, you've been down there at the Capitol for a few years now. Are we seeing more women in the legislature these days?
Well, we hope so. You know,
they're running, more are running for sure.
There are more women running, and I think it's great. You know, we have Louisiana, I think we have about 16% of the legislature is represented by women. You know, of course, our voting population is, I think we have 53% of the registered voters are female. So we're a long way from actually having a representative style of government that represents the demographics of our people. So I've been very active around the state in helping to recruit qualified women. It's not about just being a female. It's about having qualified women. We have business owners, we have engineers, we have lots of very qualified women who are running for office, and they bring a different perspective. You know, we're all a product of our life experiences and how we look at solving problems. I'm an engineer by background, so I look at things from a very you know, engineering perspective, logical in terms of how I approach problems. And so we need different perspectives. So I'm excited that we're going to have, I think, some more women in the legislature this fall.
Right. I know you've done a little bit of battling with the governor over the budget, especially during the 2018 sessions. He had a tougher time, I think, in 2018. This last session was relatively easy compared to the budget issues that you guys dealt with in 2018. How do you think he's handled the budget so far? You know, he's on the campaign trail now to run for re-election. How do you think he's handled the budget so far?
Well, it's really kind of almost humorous to me. You know, last year he was talking about the fact that he believed he had cut the budget by $600 million over several years. And of course, I knew that wasn't true, and that was proven to actually not be true. The budget has increased every year. To me, a tax cut is only when you're spending less today than you were last year or the year before, and so that's factually not true. Last year, he got a big bump or a big help from the federal tax cuts that President Trump put in place. That gave the state of Louisiana basically an extra $500 million, because in Louisiana, when Louisiana residents' federal taxes went down, their state taxes actually went up because of the way the deductions work. And so Louisiana, we never talked about that. The taxpayers in Louisiana were getting hit with an extra $500 million in income tax to the state of Louisiana, and then on top of that, the governor pushed through an extra 0.45 cent sales tax, which was another $300 million, and then this year we had a surplus.
Yeah, and I think in his campaign commercial, the first one he's released, he compares his budget to former Governor Jindal's budget. And he says his budget is stabilized compared to Jindal's budget.
Well, a stabilized budget for one person is a tax increase to somebody else. It is stabilized because we are all paying more taxes now in the state of Louisiana than we ever have before. And there was a bill in the session this year that I would have supported had it gotten to the Senate side, where we would have given some of that money back to the taxpayers, that $300 million.
Yeah.
And I think the taxpayers are tired of giving, and never knowing where their money's being spent, or not feeling like it's being spent in the right places. You know, one of the things that I worked on for the last 2 years, Fred, had to do with dedicated funds. I think we've talked about that before. Half of the state's budget is tied up in 400 different dedicated funds, where those entities get their money right off the top, no questions asked. Crazy things like the boll weevil fund. Well, we eradicated the boll weevils years ago, but yet they still get a dedicated funding stream, and what that does is it prevents us from really having all the money on the table, so that as legislators we can prioritize our funding, which is what I believe taxpayers want us to do.
Right.
And so the work of my committee is to help eliminate those dedicated funds. We've unraveled about $120 million so far, and I hope that we'll do more. We're continuing to work. This will be our third year to work on that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of taxpayers really have a problem with knowing that some of those funds are dedicated. Meanwhile, when we need cuts, we go straight to higher education and health.
Yes, that's right, because our hands are tied. So we need to untie our hands. We need to make everybody compete for funding, to justify their need for funding, explain to us what they did with the money that we've already given them, and allow us to prioritize the state's budget just like families do every year, and businesses do every year.
Yeah. All right, we're running out of time, but real quick, tell me about tort reform.
Tort and insurance reform is one of the single biggest issues in our state right now. We have the second highest car insurance rates, which every Louisiana citizen knows and experiences. Sure. We have trucking companies that are having difficulty getting insurance because the big insurance companies don't want to write insurance for them. Our society, our laws in Louisiana provide for a very litigious environment, and it is running businesses out of our state. If we don't make a major course correction with that, we're going to be in a world of hurt. I've had a couple of bills to attempt to do that. The seatbelt gag bill that would allow, right now in Louisiana, you cannot tell a jury if someone is in an accident and was not wearing their seatbelt.
Really?
That's ridiculous. That results in higher jury awards than should have happened, and certainly more serious injuries. And so my bill would have simply eliminated that, which is a common sense thing.
What happened with it?
The trial lawyers killed it.
Yeah. Well, interesting. Certainly interesting. We'll keep following your bills in the next legislative session as well. State Senator Sharon Hewitt, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.